Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons and enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of our Avengers Doomsday movie marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the release of Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing X-Men Apocalypse, released in 2016 and directed by Bryan Singer, who it turns out is a horrible person with a long history of problematic behavior. But this is the first follow-up to X-Men Days of Future Past, which brought together the first class X-Men team and the original trilogy X-Men team. So now in this one, it's the first adventure of this new team in this new timeline. This one is set in the 1980s, continuing the tradition of jumping ahead a decade in each of the movies of this series. Overall, I don't like this movie. I really want to, and I really wish that I did, but I just don't like it. I've also found it's hard to review. There are a few positives that stand out and a few negatives that stand out, which I will discuss, but there's also something about it that just doesn't fit. And so I'm kind of calling them like they all contribute toward the overall picture, but I'm kind of like, there's a bunch of micro positives, which aren't really enough to discuss much, but they do contribute towards the positivity of the movie. And then there's a lot of micro negatives that are just these tiny things that make it worse and worse. So I'm going to try that this time and talk about the positives and negatives with also some micro positives and some micro negatives. But yeah, overall, I just don't think this movie works. For positives, I have the introduction of some new characters, the Quicksilver scene, the Magneto side story, as well as some micro positives. And for negatives, I have the characterization of Apocalypse, the lack of continuity, and some micro negatives. Also, spoilers ahead as we get into discussion of this movie. Okay, so the first positive is the introduction of new X-Men characters. So several classic and new characters are introduced in X-Men Apocalypse. On the side of the heroes, we get Scott Summers as Cyclops, played by Ty Sheridan. We get Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner. We get Kurt Wagner as Nightcrawler, played by Cody Smith-McPhee. We get Jubilee, played by Alana Condor. And we also see the return of Moira McTaggart, played by Rose Byrne. So that's pretty cool. And on the side of the bad guys, we have Warren Worthington III as Angel, played by Ben Hardy. We get Betsy Braddock as Psylocke, played by Olivia Munn. And we also get Aurora Monroe as Storm, played by Alexandra Shipp. So all of these characters being introduced is pretty fun. I'm a fan of the X-Men comics, so of course it's exciting to see these new characters come back. We have seen some of them in previous iterations of the first X-Men trilogy. They all do look pretty great in their costumes. And there's definitely an influence of the 80s in all of their design, which I think is pretty cool. For their characterization, they don't stand out too much. In the next movie, there's more development, but they're kind of just all in here. They get a little bit, and it doesn't really shine, but I do like that they've introduced some of these characters again. And we'll get into this later, but Apocalypse is introduced, and him having his 4 horsemen of the apocalypse is really cool. So that's a positive for sure. Okay, the next positive is the Quicksilver scene. So in X-Men Days of Future Past, we have a really, really cool Quicksilver scene, which I reviewed in the video for that review. And in X-Men Apocalypse, we have another Quicksilver scene. It's not as cool, but it's pretty fun when the whole X-Men is getting blown up and Quicksilver arrives just in time and he goes through and saves everybody, or almost everybody. And they do some pretty fun things. It's a pretty silly scene, so it does make you laugh as you go through. And then he's kind of out of the rest of the movie, comes back a bit later and does some other things. But that scene, that Quicksilver scene, is again pretty inventive use of a speedster. So I like that. The next positive is that they give Magneto a side story. Overall, I don't know why they gave him a side story, and I don't think the side story itself contributes much to like an overall picture, but I do sort of like the side story. We've seen lots of the history of Magneto, and in this one he's kind of it's 10 years after Days of Future Past, where he kind of infiltrated the Sentinels and sort of threatened the president of the United States, and so there's a manhunt on for him, so he's gone in hiding in Europe. And since it's been 10 years, he's met a woman, fallen in love, he's had a child, so he's kind of trying to turn away from his villainous ways. And then he almost has like a streak of good where he saves somebody using his mutant power, but then it all starts to unravel. They have a really harrowing scene where his wife and daughter are killed at the same time, and then Magneto loses it, because he always does, and he's full of rage based on his history and his upbringing and stuff. So it's a pretty cool and a positive side story. I think later on they use that as this is why he sides with Apocalypse and becomes a horseman of the Apocalypse. I just didn't buy that connection, though. I didn't feel like what we saw in his side story justified him joining this villain. And then eventually, spoiler, kind of at the end, he comes back and leaves Apocalypse. So I don't think it works in the overall story, but I do think the side story is beautiful and touching, and Michael Fassbender portraying Magneto is again a powerhouse. He is so good, pretty much in everything he does, but in this role, he really knocks it out of the park. So I like him a lot, and he elevates that side story quite a bit, even though I don't think it fits overall. And then for some micro positives that I can't really say much more of other than I just liked it. I liked seeing the costumes, and especially Psylocke looks like she's right out of the comics. She's not given anything to do, but she sure looks cool, and her power set looks really cool. At the end of the movie, for like 4 seconds, we see this classic team of X-Men in their X-Men comic accurate costumes. So even on my shirt here, you can see some of the classic costumes. Right at the end of the movie, we see them for a brief second, and that's cool, but would have been cooler to see them throughout the whole movie. Some of the stuff they do with ancient Egypt is cool, looks great, looks fun, it's inventive, but there's not much else other than that. So those are some micro positives that do overall elevate the movie in little increments. There's just not much to say beyond that. Now for the negatives. Apocalypse. Apocalypse doesn't work in any way in this whole movie. His concept, I think, is not that bad. The concept is that he's the original mutant back in ancient Egypt. And he had all these powers because he was the first mutant gene thing that happened. So the concept isn't terrible, but his design is so bad from top to bottom. Portrayed by Oscar Isaac, who's very talented, Apocalypse just looks awful, and I know that's been discussed by everybody. This is not a new take, but he just looks terrible. His coloring is so wrong. In the comics, he's very gray with some blue, and in this one, he's just full blue, almost purple. I feel like the X-Men are too blue as a team of heroes. They've got Mystique, who's blue, Beast, who's blue, Nightcrawler, who's blue. I feel like I'm forgetting other blue characters. I don't know why they're all blue. They just are all blue, and it's too much. And so then Apocalypse being bluish purple is just terrible. And then his tubes and his armor, none of it works. He just looks terrible. Then his power set doesn't really make sense. He can sort of control sand, but only sort of when he wants to. And then he can elevate other people's mutant gene and make them stronger. It's kind of cool. I don't get it, but it's kind of cool. And then he can transfer his consciousness. So is that his power? I don't really know. His voice is dumb. Bless Oscar Isaac, but that voice is just terrible. And they do like a modified sound echoey thing that just sounds like a gimmick. He's just terrible. Every moment he's on screen is bad. I do like that he has his 4 horsemen, tying into some biblical prophecy of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And I do like the 4 horsemen he has. There's some comic book connections to most of those characters, so it's cool, but it just doesn't work. And for this to be centered around this iconic X-Men villain to fall flat is a real shame. So that's a negative for me. Now, another negative, which has been mentioned in almost every X-Men review, is the lack of continuity. They just don't care about continuity in between these movies. They care about each movie and how it works on its own, which I guess is commendable. It's just frustrating as a fan and as a viewer. A couple examples, we see another William Stryker again. So in this movie, at the end of Days of Future Past, Stryker pulls Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman, out of the water, suggesting he found Wolverine, he's going to take him over and do the Weapon X experimentation on him. And then his eyes flash yellow, suggesting, okay, Stryker, or at least this version of Stryker, is Mystique impersonating him. Okay, that's cool. And then in this movie, there's this other Stryker, the same actor, but then he kind of comes in and he's got Wolverine in his Weapon X program. So has he had him for 10 years? That doesn't really make sense. And we've already seen Wolverine's origin in Weapon X in the movie X-Men Origins Wolverine. I do know that that one's kind of not in continuity, but we've already seen it. So then in this movie, our heroes are captured, they're taken to the Weapon X facility, and then they encounter animalistic Wolverine in his classic comic Weapon X getup. I think they just wanted to have that visual. They wanted Hugh Jackman in there just to show him in the Weapon X thing with the silly helmet, and they just made the movie work towards that. There's some other things with continuity that don't make sense. I think it's catching up to the actors, where James McAvoy and Jennifer Lawrence and Michael Fassbender and Nicholas Hoult were all introduced in X-Men First Class in the 60s, and now it's 20 years later, but do they look 20 years older? Not by a long shot. And I think it's starting to catch up to them at this point with this little gimmick of a different decade in each movie. So the continuity, again, they just don't care, and it gets frustrating as a fan, so that's a negative. And now for micro negatives, there's a scene where Charles Xavier's hair falls out of his head. They didn't need to do that. Just make him have a change of heart and he wants a different hairstyle. It doesn't need to fall out to make him bald. It's weird. Then there's a scene where Storm's black hair turns white. Just make her have white hair. It doesn't need to be a reason that her hair became white. There's a scene where Psylocke just walks away at the end, and like they show the camera is still and she just walks away in the background, and it looks dumb. And then they're planting seeds of Jean Grey having this Phoenix Force ability, which they'll explore in the next movie. So they're trying to plant seeds, but the seeds they plant in this one don't end up being the seeds that are grown in the next movie. So when you've seen them both, it doesn't work. I guess if you just look at X-Men Apocalypse by itself, the Jean Grey stuff is fine. But those are all negatives that contribute to the overall picture. Now, how might X-Men Apocalypse connect to Avengers Doomsday? While the actors who portray the older X-Men characters are confirmed to be in Avengers Doomsday, none of the actors in this movie are confirmed to be in that movie. So it's possible that there's no connection between X-Men Apocalypse to Doomsday. As I've said before, I do think that Hugh Jackman, who's in this movie, will appear in an Avengers project, but I lean more towards Secret Wars, which is being released in December 2027, rather than Avengers Doomsday. So maybe there's a connection there, but I think it wouldn't be Doomsday. I think it'd be Secret Wars. So it's possible there's no connection with X-Men Apocalypse to Avengers Doomsday. So that's my review of X-Men Apocalypse. What did you think of this movie, and how do you think it may connect to Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok, and you can also check us out on Letterboxd, where I have all 5 versions of the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, as well as the other movie marathons that we have going on, like the Knives Out Movie Marathon. The next movie in the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon is X-Men Dark Phoenix. See you at the movies.